Welcome to Total Design Live. It's a podcast where real tabletop game designers, with a surprise set of design constraints, design a game right before your very ears. It's game design without a net, and it starts now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Season 1, Total Design Live. I'm David Abelson.
And I'm Rosco Schock. Thanks for joining us. This week, welcoming game designer Jonathan Chaffer. Hey, Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. Thanks for agreeing to participate with our little challenge here. For those who may have not met you before, could you tell us a little bit about your game design background and what you've been up to recently?
Sure thing. So I've been attempting professional level game design for the past, probably about 15 years now. I have released a couple smaller card games that are filler weight, including one called Filler from Green Couch Games. Probably best, if you know me, it's probably because you probably have played one of my Holiday Hijinks line of escape room games that come from Grand Gamers Guild, which are little 18-card games in the vein of an exit or unlock game. But I do plenty of non-puzzle designs as well, and always looking for the next thing. Most of my games are fairly lightweight, either kind of topping out at Gateway, I would say, as the top of the range for what I design.
Awesome. Your hijinks games, I have several of those, so they're really awesome. That's great stuff people should check out if they haven't heard of them before. Just a little plug there for you. I think they're great. So
yeah, and so therefore I am no stranger to designing under constraints, because 18 cards is not much.
That sounds like it. Really nice to have you on the show, Jonathan. Now, before we dive into the episode, let's go over the ground rules. You're going to be given 2 constraints. You'll be asked to design as much of a game as you can in 45 minutes. One of the constraints will be fairly specific, and it's intended to be a starting anchor point. The other constraint will be fairly vague, and it's intended to be a direction you can travel in. These constraints could be related to theme or mechanics or components or game category or even player experience. Anything not specified is open to your interpretation. We're mostly interested in your thought process, Jonathan, and how you approach creative thinking. We're not looking for a balanced game or rows in a spreadsheet. We're here to be a sounding board, but we're not going to help you design the game. Our goal is purely to help the audience better understand your creative process if we need to. Once we give you the constraints, we're going to walk you through a set of general questions to help get you started, get your train on the tracks, and the rest is up to you. Sound all right?
All right. Yeah.
Okay, so Rosco?
Yep. Without further ado, here are your constraints. And I'll put them in the chat. Your first constraint is going to be a component constraint. So it's numbers on cards, 1 to 100. So the thing with this, you can add other cards, you can add components, you can add tokens, boards, you can make a euro, it doesn't matter. The 1 to 100 numbers on cards constraint, the numbers must play a meaningful role in the game somehow. They must be some decision that you have to use. It can be whatever you want, but they have to do something. The numbers have to be relevant.
And it's important to recognize that the numbered cards don't have to just have numbers on them.
Okay.
They can have other things as well.
Right. You can have many multi-use cards. And the second constraint that's more vague is going to be theme-based. And that theme is home. Anything that you think of when you think of is fair game, that's just a direction you can kind of travel. So now we're going to walk through this set of questions. Drop them in chat for you. The audience will hear them in just a second. First, for component, what game do you think of when you think of this component?
First things that come to mind are classic card games like, games where you're sequencing things. So Racco comes to mind immediately.
Great.
Gets a lot done with just cards with numbers. I don't think there's anything else going on in those components at all. Or more modern, simpler game, the mind, that kind of thing. That's the first thing I think about. With that big of a number range, it's going to be harder to do things in the vein of, say, a trick-taking game, or games that have a lot of the same action repeated doesn't naturally fit in there, although you could certainly fit that with ranges of cards. Those are the first things that come to mind.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple other ones that you mentioned. The Mind for Sale also does a lot of stuff with numbers. It's not 1 to 100, but it does a lot of stuff with ordering, similar to Racco.
Mm-hmm.
I know we talked last episode about Power Grid. Now, Power Grid doesn't go to
Sure.
100 either, but it has that market that's always resorted based on the numbers of the power plants, which are numbered 1 to 11.
Then you've got two other choices. A game like, I think it's Shobu. It uses numbers on cards as a secondary feature for bidding. And then a game like No Thanks, where numbers are pretty heavily used in that game as well.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And kind of the common feature on these tends to be looking for sequences, runs in that big for one reason or another. In No Thanks, trying to avoid points by getting runs next to each other, or something like The Mind. Those kind of games where it's not specifically about getting runs, but that's optimal. So that comes to mind as a thing to watch for, as something that would be rewarding to players, kind of intuitively something you want.
So the next question we have here is, does this component push you to a specific game category? Now this says theme, but like, does that make you think of a certain?
I mean, we've talked about already in the examples quite a wide variety, but the first thing I gravitate toward with something like this is maybe a push your luck style. There's a lot that, I mean, you spin a larger game out of something as simple as a higher or lower betting game. Could that be a central mechanism in something that is a little bit more fleshed out?
You mean something that calls on a game like AC Doocy?
Yeah, exactly. You know, that is, could that be a central, I've got a middle-ish card, I've got a high card, you know, evaluating if it's more than just a win-loss in the two directions, but something that escalates, that could be interesting when you've got a big range like that. I've seen a lot of high cards already. Maybe it's safe to go lower.
Sure. An interesting thing to think about. Can you think of a game that uses this poorly or in a way that this component that like doesn't quite work, or maybe even like think of it the other way of like, what's a pitfall of like this kind of component?
That's a tougher one. Just thinking about the examples that we've given so far, when you said Power Grid, that was interesting. I wouldn't say that uses it poorly, but I would say that is not a very central feature to that mark. Solved a design problem there of how to make sure that things don't escalate too fast, too soon. But if we're talking about a game where this is the focus, that wouldn't be one to me.
Okay, I'm glad you said that, though. I think that sort of clarifies for us that you don't have to make this the focus of the game. It just has to be an integral part.
But what if I want to?
You may. You certainly may.
Constraints are helpful. So, yeah.
So do we want to jump to talking about theme a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Go ahead, David.
So what's the first thing that this particular theme makes you think of? Home.
Well, yeah. So the first things that come to mind are food-based themes, things that would happen in a kitchen, furniture and decor arrangement. Been a lot of that lately, but could also go in a direction of home rather than house. Could be something like what if it's like a riff on Homeward Bound, or gathering food for hibernation, or something like that. An animal theme
interesting ideas.
An animal go well with, because home, like there was a recent discussion on cozy games that we were having, and recent Building the Game podcast episode about that made me start thinking about that, and home, obviously goes with that, and fuzzy animals seems to ramp up the cozy in a game. So,
and nobody doesn't like fuzzy animals.
That's right.
So does this theme suggest a specific game category or mechanism that you think might fit well?
So there are a few different ones. A few different things that have been mentioned. So the home core arrangement type thing calls to mind an optimization game where you probably have a spatial puzzle or a set collection type of thing happening. The outdoor version of this probably fits a little bit better with there being some kind of danger, whether that's just time. Winter's approaching and need to get something done by then. other animal hazards, something like that. So that would probably, if I'm thinking this push your luck, that might fit a little better. Or the push your luck thing could go with we're back in the kitchen, could go with preparing food that you don't want to burn something. So you've got to keep it going on the stove until something happens. Or maybe you're trying to time when the toast is done, something like that.
Okay, that sounds like a good bunch of things to think about. Can you think of any other games that do a good job with the home theme?
Yeah, Verdant is a good one that in the cozy realm. That's definitely about home decor, arrangement, feng shui kind of ideas without being overly spatial. There's a spatial element there, but it's not a polyomino game or anything. So kind of bucks the trend a little bit there. That would be an interesting point to jump off from.
Nothing fuzzy.
Well, the fuzzy ones, I haven't played Creature Comforts yet, but I understand that that's really what that's doing. And I've heard only good things about it. A lot of nature games actually could fit the bill. Playing a lot of Forest Shuffle recently, and while that's not cartoony cute animals, it certainly has a lot of nice interactions between animals that make you feel comfy, and it does feel like a home for them that you're building.
Okay, so
yeah,
that sort of fits the bill.
I think so.
So then just one more question here before we set you loose. Does this theme push you towards, and I think you have a natural leaning as you mentioned earlier, but does this theme push you towards a specific weight of experience?
Yeah, so I've got to make a decision of which of these categories of themes to push toward. I think I think my natural inclinations, of course, are never going to go too heavy with this, but even so, there's quite a range in there. I think the preparing for winter foraging idea probably has a little bit more meat on it for what would be involved, as opposed to if I was going with something very light that is mostly just the cards with numbers with few other components, then that's probably, like the cooking theme, would fit that better.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, I would say you're prepared enough that you can start this on your own. Roscoe, you feel good about letting him loose?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of kind of ideas that you mentioned. You can just kind of explore and bounce them around. So I think seems like you're pretty primed to tackle.
All right, have some fun. We'll be here if you need us.
All right, yeah. So I think so normally this is going to be quite different from my normal design process, which is typically, well, 9 times out of 10 it's pun first, and I don't have that in my head. So the other things that I go to pretty frequently are finding a established game or game genre and seeing if it still works if you change something fundamental about it, or taking two of them and mashing them together. I'm not sure if in this context, and those tend to be things that happen over a longer period of time. Like I'll come up with the title and the game doesn't spring forth until several months later when there's some mechanism that fits that, and then we're off to the races. So starting on this hot, I might not go those normal ways. I think I'm gravitating toward the AC-doocy idea as what could that do? So how does that make you feel, I guess, is the first question. For that to be interesting, we've got to have something that what that's good for is producing a lot of rapid high and low moments. A game like Ink and Gold, say, or Can't Stop tends to produce those very well. And so maybe that's where I need to go to decide where to go with this theme. If I'm gonna use that mechanism somewhere, what theme feels like that experience? So it could be, yeah, I don't want to go grim with it, which is what would happen if the you lose is your little squirrel got eaten. eaten or something like that. So I would need to if we're gonna do home, I think it is, I like the homeward bound idea of pets. Let's just go verbatim with it. You're all pets trying to make your way home. That gives you a start, finish, maybe literal racetrack that you're going down, and perhaps the actual gameplay of it is quite reminiscent of something like Can't Stop, where you take a turn and possibly bust for the turn. So problem is, when doing something like this, I'm modeling this after one of the perfect games that's out there that can't really improve on. So how do I go a different direction than Can't Stop? So I think maybe, so what do we do with these cards that would make this more interesting? What if we have cards 1 to 100, but they're not all in the deck that we're drawing from? So the basics of movement here is going to be, you flip a card, you either stop or you declare higher or lower, you see the next card. If you're right, you get to move another step and make that decision again. If you're wrong, you didn't move on that leg of the journey. Okay, so that's the basics. So what we can play with is that maybe that deck that you're drawing from isn't cards 1 to 100 shuffled. Maybe the players influence the contents of that deck somehow over the course of the game. So that could either be everyone has their own deck of numbered cards and we're doing something like a little mini deck building thing. So we could have cards that have events on them, so they're not just the number. Maybe one that says you can shift the next card you draw by 10 in one direction or the other, or things like that. So then,
would that be like benefits that you earn by pushing your luck further? There, like the more cards you have, the more. What did you mean by that?
So I think what I mean is the baseline is just going to be the number of cards that you're able to successfully flip without busting is the number of spaces on the track you move. That can be the baseline. Okay. But let's say you're doing this flipping from your personal deck that you shuffle before your turn, but there's some way that you have and let's say your deck starts out with all of the multiples of 10 in it. And then all of the other cards, all of the other numbers are things that you can gain in some way to be determined, and that will then modify the contents of your deck for the next turn. And
so I think,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think you've headed in a direction that's competitive, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I end up designing cooperative games because the game tells me it needs to be cooperative. But it's way harder than designing a competitive game. So I'm not going to do that in 45 minutes.
That sounds fair.
Yeah. So yeah, certainly cooperative thematically could make sense here, but I think the tropes of the board game genre here will make people overlook that pretty easily. So it could just be whoever gets to their owner first wins. Yeah. So, and we'll say that everyone gets home. It's just whoever gets home first gets the most food that has been left out for you. And you get to eat out of all the other pets' bowls before they get home. So,
or you get the silk bed, or you get to sleep in the bed with mom and dad that night instead of on the floor.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that the way I'd start, I don't like trying to throw a whole lot of content at a design early on because I want to test out the basics. So I think I would probably start by trying to brainstorm a few core things these cards could do to manipulate the main idea of the push your luck. Then assign those. Let's say I can come up with 9 of those. I could assign those to cards assign those to the ones digits of cards. So the zeros digits are all going to be just the playing cards that everyone has a copy of. And then all of the other cards will be in another deck. And let's say we start by doing a dynamic market deck building game. So we'll just shuffle those all into a deck and deal out a little market that you get to take a card from for something. Let's say you get, that'll also be the built-in consolation prize for busting. So you want to temper I want to temper the feel bad of busting without making it feel meaningless. If you succeed, there will be ways to get cards, but when you bust, you're going to we'll start at 2 cards. So on bust, you claim 2 cards. And then it could be that you gain cards on success depending on where you land on the track. Perhaps it is not just a straight track, but a branching track that could have some. I like it when a racing game has some choices about, do I go the fast way or the slow way that gets me more stuff? Think of Quest for El Dorado or Salmon Run or one of those racing games. So yeah, so we'll have a branching track, at least non-linear track with some rewards on the out of the way spaces, and those rewards as a baseline will be adding cards to your deck or culling cards from your deck. Okay. I think it's kind of shaping up a little bit there. So what are the possibilities then for what these actions on cards could be that you would gain? So one of the benefits of getting the cards is going to be just, no matter what the composition of the numbers in your deck are, you haven't changed any probabilities by just doing that. You've only changed what you have to remember the midpoint is. That'll shift as you get more cards in your deck. So the abilities are going to have to be where the meat of this is. So what are some obvious ones? One would be give you a cushion on the next card draw, where you can say you do not bust if your next card is less than 10 from this card, something like that. We could have an ability that just means that you have a safety net where you can when you bust, maybe you can stop at that. You must stop at that point, but you don't bust. Say maybe that's just on the next card. We could have a peek action. Peek at X cards. You can't just do a peek and rearrange because that's the same as just succeeding that many times, but maybe you can peek at the next 3. Maybe you get to bury 1 and shuffle the other 2 or something like that. So we got peek, we got bury, we could have trash. I'm trying to think what else could manipulate.
Let me ask you one question real quick, Jonathan. So these abilities, could you just clarify? They happen when they're revealed?
That's what I'm thinking.
I think them.
You certainly could do on buy, but I'm thinking you've got them in your deck, and then they trigger when you flip that card.
Gotcha.
I would think that would be the baseline.
And do you think that whether they bust or not, or they always trigger? I'm just trying to clarify what you're thinking.
No, that's good. I think it makes more sense. I think it would normally make more sense to say if you successfully flipped a card without busting, then its ability triggers. That's what I would probably do first. But it's nice that there's design space for things that could trigger on flip that would. I think it's probably more interesting usually to say, okay, this thing is happening now, and have that impact your next decision, rather than it feeling a little bit more on the output randomness side of, because I flipped it, this good thing happened, and that's the end of my decision. Yeah. So, but
that
then
makes
there's
sense.
also,
So you want less luck.
Well, yeah. So I tend to use the Jeff Engelstein terms of the input output randomness divide. So I like it. I tend to like more on the input side. Or another way of putting it is when the RNG does something bad to me in the game, I want to be able to point to something, a decision that I made that put me in that position.
Makes sense.
So yeah, so I always want to say, sure, the roll of the dice, the flip of the card screwed me over, but I could have just not done that thing and I would have been fine. That's to me the one of the aspects that distinguishes luck from push your luck.
That makes a lot of sense.
Alongside the escalating risk reward kind of curve as you go along your turn. Yeah. So another thing these cards could do would be effects that happen. I'm thinking more about this timing question, which is a good one. So the other thing that abilities could do would be if you end your turn without busting, you get to do X. So that could be an extra space on the board, or movement through. Maybe there's different terrain on this board, and certain cards allow you to traverse that kind of terrain. So maybe you can't paddle across the river unless you have revealed a card of the appropriate type during that push sequence.
Which would be a boat.
Right. Or yeah, I haven't thought much about whether these cards, they probably have some actual theme to attach to the abilities, but I think I would probably do that part theme first because the design space doesn't seem huge for what those abilities are unless the board gets more complicated, which might be the way to go. So like I said, the terrain could be interesting. So let's say, for sake of argument, we do the same thing as the games I mentioned, Road to El Dorado or Cubitos, or one of those racing games where, especially El Dorado, the board is the racetrack is modular and not very complicated, but there are a few different types of spaces that have a significant impact on how you play. And then that goes back to what I was saying earlier about wanting to have the topology of the board back up the having some out of the way places you can go that are less efficient but give you larger rewards. So a way to make that more granular, maybe the market is refreshed on a conveyor belt. So we've got a market of start with 5 cards. 5 is a nice number, and have spaces that let you get more cards, or even a default action that you can take the oldest card. And what you get as a benefit is more choice in the card that you get from the market. That's another knob. I still like the idea of when you bust, you get something. That something should be qualitatively different than what you get for succeed. I think that's a rule I try to stick to in any game where there's a catch-up mechanism of some kind. The catch-up mechanism getting you something that is kind of thing than what you get.
It's safe to say that loading those cards up into your deck isn't always a benefit, right? Because this is a deck building game.
Yes.
Maybe that's how that works.
Yes, absolutely. Which is why I think like one of the big knobs you get in a deck builder is culling. I think what I would want this to be distinguished from a deck builder from most deck builders, in that most of those rely on complicated fun interactions of cards that you can chain things and draw more cards and do all of the Magic the Gathering stuff you want to do on your turn, whereas this would emphasize turn to turn, do I risk flipping another card? That needs to be the core. It's just got to be something where you'd say, hey, I know I've got this great card that I bought recently, and it would be great if that came up. I haven't seen it yet. It's on the right direction. Maybe I should risk pushing one more card. I think that feels good. Also, by making it just a race victory, I don't have to worry about balancing any points at all, which is a big win. The balancing ideally could make the card abilities similar enough to one another that similar in effectiveness to one another that the players could self-balance the game by use of this market, by making it harder to get the things that are farther away or more expensive. But I don't think this would support a current.
Yeah, can you just talk about the market a little bit? Like you said, I mean, I get
Yeah.
used to the conveyor belt and like a dynamic one. Were you thinking there's like 5 cards? Does it is it like through the ages and like the oldest one always goes? Like anything about that would be interesting.
Yeah, so my default would be 5 always seems like a good place to start. That's what a lot of games, that's what Star Realms does, I think. The games that have this dynamic non-static market, and in some cases it's just when a card is taken it's replaced, but I'm thinking yes, it slides down, so the one closest to the deck is always the newest one, and the one farthest from the deck is the quote cheapest if we were doing a through the ages thing, although I'm thinking probably not actually currency, just that's number one. Some actions would let you choose between the first 2 cards or the first 3 cards in that market. Whether to force one to be ejected at the end would not be something I'd have in an initial iteration of a game like this. That would be something to introduce if it looks like there's a problem with a market going stale. If the abilities on the cards end up having a lot of synergy that matter, that's where I could see that kind of thing happening. At first blush here, the ones I've thought of so far don't really work that way, though that's another interesting avenue to pursue. Maybe there could be benefits you get if you reveal a certain number of a certain kind of card, a little mini set collection. Actually, that could really add to the push your luck factor, now that I think of it. If say that if I get 3 treats, I get 2 bonus spaces. I've seen 2 of them already, and I know there's one more in my deck. That would be another place where that would feel rewarding. So that's another good one to put on one of these numbers. So I think I have written down so far 7 different things on cards. So it would take a little bit more work, because I think having a unique one on every one's digit would feel nice and symmetric for a first pass of getting this into cardboard and pushing it around, because then you can think of what does a 1 do, what does a 2 do, and not have to read every single card. Oh, high 9 came up. That's what I'm looking for. So I think that's where I'd go with that. So far, I've got make the next draw safer by giving you a wider range that will succeed, or giving you a safety net where you say the next one, if you bust, you just stop and succeed. I've got peek at the next few and probably bury and shuffle. I think I could do trash. I can do a set collection that gives you a bonus, and I would have some terrain specific things. Could flesh that out with a couple more or a couple varieties on the set collection, and terrain ideas probably actually makes more sense, and have that be the initial deck. Then on your turn, you would push until you decide to stop. You bust, you get, we'll say, 2 cards of your choice from the market, or trash 1, make your deck better in some way. If you succeed, you get to move 1 space per card you flip, plus any abilities that happen. And then you would resolve any icons on the space you landed on the track. And the first player to get to the end, get home, gets the treats. I think we've got our sketch of a game. What I don't have is a name. and that just kills me, because normally that's the first thing I have.
Because the pun has not arrived yet.
That's right. So I've been taken to just when I don't have one, it's just project and then a word. So this game for now is going to be called Project Homeward.
Okay. So that was very good. What I'd love for you to do in the next minute or so is just give us the elevator pitch for the game you just designed. 30 seconds or so, give or take, maybe a minute. Go.
All right. So Project Homeward is a game about pets that have been separated from their humans that they love so much, and are trying to get home across difficult terrain. This is a race game where you're trying to be the first to accomplish this goal so that you can get the most snuggles out of all of your competitors. And you're going to do this through a push your luck mechanism where you're going to flip cards from a personal deck and then decide whether to stop and take your movement on the board or flip another card after declaring whether the next one will be higher or lower. And if you're successful, you can either keep going or stop. And if you fail, you're going to make your deck better so that in future turns, you can succeed more. The game consists of cards that have a range of 1 to 100, and most cards, other than the ones you start with, will have some sort of special ability that triggers whenever you flip it from your deck. So you will be gathering more cards from a central market that other players will be jockeying for the best cards out of those to build your deck for the next turn while you navigate a board that has hazards and bonuses in the terrain between you and your goal.
Awesome.
That's So I just got I have some closing questions for you. Hopefully you can walk through with me real quick. That was very engaging, at least for me. I don't know about for the listeners, but it was engaging for me. So did you have fun? That's the first question.
Absolutely. Yes, it was a different kind of thinking that I normally do. Actually, closer to kind of experience I tend to have when I'm playtesting someone else's design than when I'm doing my own design.
Fair enough. That makes some sense. So would you say this was easier or harder than you thought it was going to be?
I think probably somewhat easier. The prompts led me down. I think that getting the theme down was the hardest part for me. But the component prompt got things moving pretty quickly.
Okay, and it seemed like you ran pretty hard from that point. How close? I know you mentioned this in the beginning of your process, but how close to your normal process would you say this is?
Yeah, not at all. I have normally fully designed what I believe is a publishable game in my head in the shower over the course of 3 months before I put anything on paper, and then determine that it's a failure. Yeah, so I tend to do a lot of advanced rumination before I try to get this specific with things. I would probably have gotten to the point where I would be playing a themeless game with this core mechanism first and seeing what happens and taking my time with it, and then probably bring it to my local design meetup and just talk through ideas there in a much less structured way than we just did before I proceeded. But other than the speed of it, I think it's kind of similar in other ways.
Do you think that you've sort of unlocked something that a new process that you can experiment with, something that will help you to get something to the table faster?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Possibly. I have never been in a position where I have more time than ideas. So this was a good idea generator. That is rarely my bottleneck. The refinement and the development is the part that really takes the effort for me. So I think I would choose this process more out of the fun of going through this with others rather than needing it. But I think for people who do get in a mental block over where should I start next, I think this would be a good process for that.
That makes sense. So just 2 more questions here. Are you happy with where you ended up in 45 minutes?
I think I am. I think this is something I might pursue. Yeah, I don't know. I have to figure out when I'm going to get to it, but I'm either going to design this or dump it on someone else so I can play it.
There you go. Well, you already answered my next question, which was, do you think you'll continue with the design?
Yeah. I think it's likely once I sit with it that there will be things that change pretty drastically, but I think I've got a seed here I want to see come a game somehow, whether it's mine or someone else's.
Great.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for being on our podcast and this season. Really appreciate it. Just wanted to ask, is there anything you're kind of working on right now, game design wise, or a project that you're kind of excited about?
Yeah, I think by the time this comes out, the Kickstarter for my game Bouba Kiki will be either underway or complete. That is a party game coming out where that it's about communication that I'm pretty excited about. I will always have more of the escape room content coming out pretty regularly. And if you're interested in learning more about those or being notified, I've got an email newsletter I send out once a month that has some free puzzles in it that you can find at thechaffers.com/news if you want to sign up.
That sounds cool. Who's the Kickstarter? That game, is that a self or is that someone?
That'll be coming out through Grand Gamers Guild. And
Okay.
it's going to be
Awesome.
paired with a reprint of my earlier speed game called Stroop.
Awesome.
Stroop.
Listeners can check that out. How can people connect with you online, or are you going to any upcoming conventions? You going to Unpub, Origins? What's coming up for you?
Yeah, I've never been a huge social media person, and even less after the meltdown of the last year or two. But my newsletter is a great way to keep in touch. You can find me on Discord. I have my own server where I post updates, and I'm active on a couple others, including building the game. I don't know about big conventions I'm going to be in the near future. I will certainly be at Protospiel, Michigan this summer, likely Protospiel Chicago, and Grand Con, if not more.
Awesome.
That is an exciting bunch of things going on in your life.
Absolutely.
Hey, listeners, if you want to join in any discussion about this episode, this season, or if you'd like to participate in a future season, reach out to us online at Total Design Live, either on Twitter or Blue Sky. That's it for this episode, but we hope you'll join us again soon for more game design without a net. Until next time, I'm David.
And I'm Rosco. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Total Design Live. Be sure to check out how other designers did this season with the same surprise design constraints. We hope this podcast will help inspire you in your own board game design journey and give you a peek behind the curtain about how other designers' creative process works. Please like and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We hope you'll come back and join us again for future episodes.